Welcome to another video lecture by Utkarp Digital Classes. I am your tutor Raghav Chaturvedi, and today we are going to dive into the third part of ray optics and discuss topics such as prism, chromatic aberrations and optical instruments. Before beginning the lecture, let's look at some questions from the previous one which we left out. So a transparent cube of side D made of a material of refractive index mu2 is immersed in a liquid of refractive index mu1. A ray is incident on that face AB at an angle theta. Total internal reflection takes place at a point E on the face BC. Then theta must satisfy which of the following? If I want to do this question, I should be very well aware of two things. First of all, what are the different angles in the question? And secondly, the Snell's law and the conditions for total internal reflection. Okay, we'll quickly look at this question. So this is your angle theta. Let's say I'll make these are the two normals, normal 1, normal 2. Okay, if this is theta, let's call this angle as the refracted angle R. This is 90 degree, so this is 90 minus R. Now we know two things. First of all, at this position E, total internal reflection is happening. So that what does that mean? It means that your refracted angle is at least 90 degrees. The refracted angle at this point. Using these, let's just quickly write how do you relate theta to those angles. So using, let me call this sorry, this is A, this is B, and this is C, and this is D. If I take the AB surface, I can use my Snell's law to write sine of theta into mu1 is equal to sine of R into mu2. For the case of total internal reflection on BC, I can write the sine of 90 minus R into mu2 is equal to sine of 90 into mu1. Okay, this is the minimum that we can give. So sine 90 minus R is nothing but cos R into mu2 is equal to mu1, or I can write that cos R is nothing but mu1 by mu2. Okay, given this, I need to substitute it back in the equation for AB. So there I had sine theta is equal to mu2 by mu1 into sine R. Now I can substitute for sine R as root 1 minus cos square R is equal to mu2 by mu1 into root over 1 minus mu1 by mu2 whole square. Okay, this turns out to be nothing but mu2 by mu1 into 1 by mu2 into root over mu2 square minus mu1 square. This mu2 will cancel out. We'll be left with 1 by mu1 into root mu2 square minus mu1 square. Now if I take mu1 square common from the numerator, I can have mu1 divided by mu1 into root of mu2 square by mu1 square minus 1. Okay, these two will cancel each other out. So I have my theta, which is the maximum theta, is nothing but sine inverse of root of mu2 square by mu1 square minus 1. Okay, now for total internal reflection, I have that theta, this theta should be less than this angle. Okay, so when your theta is less than this angle, only then will you get total internal reflection there, because your angle will of incidence will determine your angle of refraction. So because sine theta into mu is a constant for my Snell's law, so because my angle theta is denoting what will happen right here, and similarly 290 minus r. So that is why. Let's revisit another question. In figure, the optical fiber is L is equal to 2 meter long and has a diameter of D is equal to 20 micrometer. If a ray of light is incident on one end of the fiber at an angle theta 1 is equal to 40 degrees, the number of reflections it makes before emerging from the other end is close to which of these? So in this question, you are given, let me just zoom this in. So you are given that this distance is nothing but 20 micrometer, okay, and you are given this angle to be 40, and let me just make a normal here and call this as the distance x. Okay, now if I use the Snell's law of refraction, I have that 1 into sine 40 is equal to 1.31 into sine of theta. That implies I can write my sine theta as 0.64 divided by 1.31 is nothing but 0.5. That implies I can write my theta to be equal to 30 degrees. Okay, now x is given by what? If you have this as 20, then in order to find x, I can easily write that x is equal to 20 into cot theta. Now in order to find the number of reflections is nothing but the length 2 meter divided by x, which is 20, into cot theta, which is nothing but, first of all let me just write this in terms of the standard units, because this was 20 micrometer and we already have the value of theta as 30, so this comes out to be 2 into 10 to the power 6 divided by 20 into root 3, which is similar to 57000, which is the fourth answer. In order to begin our discussion, we'll talk briefly about the prism. So a prism is a homogeneous transparent medium such as glass, which is enclosed by two plane surfaces inclined at an angle. So right here I've shown you one kind of prism. It has two surfaces, as you can easily see, this one and this one. Okay, and they have an angle in between them. These surfaces are called as refracting surfaces, and the angle between them is known as the refracting angle or the angle of the prism. So this angle A will be known as the angle of the prism. Okay. So there are different things that I want to mention here. First of all, you should be aware of the proper terminology. Okay. Before that, prism does not only come in this form. Prisms can be of various forms. So you can have a prism of this form as well. Okay, you can have a prism of this form as well. You can have a prism like this. You can even have a prism like this. Okay, prisms can be of any form, but all you should remember is, for example, light comes in, refracts, refracts again. Okay, in the first case I can have light comes in, it refracts and it refracts again. Similarly for all the other cases that I told you about. So the one that is prominent for the exam is the prism that I've shown you here, this configuration. And let's talk about several things from here. First of all, PQ will be your incident ray. So PQ is your incident ray. QR is your refracted ray. RS is your emergent ray. Okay, so I'll just mark them quickly with another pen, which is, so my PQ is my incident, let's call it I. My QR is the refracted ray, which is R. Similarly, my RS is the emergent ray, let's call it E. Then you have the angle of prism. Okay, A is the angle of prism. Next, what do we have? We have I1, which is the incident angle on face AB. We have I2, which is the emergent angle on face AC. We have R1 is equal to refracted angle on face AB. And we have R2, which is refracted angle on face AC. Okay, now we need to find the total deviation. So deviation is what? Your initially your PQ should have been going in this direction. Now because you place some material in front of it, it finally ends up going in this direction. Okay, so the angle by which it has changed, this angle, is your total deviation that has happened. Okay, so as you can see from the figure, this total deviation is nothing but the sum of two deviations, this deviation delta 1, and then you have another deviation right here. So I can write my total deviation, let's say total deviation, and I'll call it delta is equal to delta 1 plus delta 2. Now what is delta 1? I had delta 1 is equal to I1 minus R1. My delta 2 is equal to I2 minus R2. Okay, so the total angle of deviation turns out to be what? My total angle of deviation turns out to be I1 plus I2 minus R1 plus R2. Okay, with this in mind, I can go back and look at the triangles, let's say QOR. So triangle QO and R. In this triangle, one angle is R1, another is R2, another is at the center, which is theta. Okay, so I have what? I have R1 plus R2 plus theta. R1 plus R2 plus theta is equal to 180. Okay, and if I take the triangle, or if I take the quadrilateral AQOR, AQO and R, if I take this quadrilateral, what do I see? I see that A plus theta is equal to 180 degrees. So A plus theta is equal to 180 degrees. Why? Because this angle is 90, this angle is 90, because these are normals to the plane right there. Okay, so that is why your A plus theta is equal to 180 degree, and using these two I can easily write that my total angle of deviation delta is equal to I1 plus I2 minus A. So this is the first equation that you should definitely remember when it comes to prisms. Okay, now you can, if you want to calculate different things, then you should remember the Snell's law at different surfaces. So for the first surface, you can have the Snell's law, which translates to mu1 into sine I1 is equal to mu2 into sine R1. Similarly, mu2 into sine of R2 is equal to mu1 into sine of I2. Okay, this you should be clear about. If you know these equations and you know the deviation, then most of the questions regarding the prism are done. So next, there are some conditions. Let me just tell you what happens in the prism again. You have an incoming ray, let's say PQ. It gets refracted here, okay, and it bends towards the normal because it's going from a lighter to a denser medium. And after refraction here, it comes out, okay, and it bends away from the normal. The angle should be very clear to you by now. And let's talk about the condition of minimum deviation. So I'll just zoom this out a little. So for minimum deviation, what do you have? You have I1 is equal to I2 is equal to I. This is the first condition for minimum deviation. That implies R1 is equal to R2 is equal to R. And since R1 plus R2 is equal to A, therefore R plus R is equal to A, or R plus R is equal to A, or R is equal to A by 2. You should keep this in mind. So these are the conditions for minimum deviation. R is equal to angle of prism divided by 2. And how do you get the minimum deviation? Minimum deviation is nothing but 2 times I minus A, because it was equal to I1 plus I2 minus A. Here I1 is equal to I2, as I already stated. So this is the condition for minimum deviation. So I'll just write it down here. Condition for minimum deviation. Okay, you should make small notes of these. Next important formula from here is the formula for mu, which is the refractive index of the prism. Okay, here I assume that the prism is placed in air, so mu1 is equal to 1, and using the Snell's law I can easily find that my mu can be written as sine of A plus delta minimum by 2 divided by sine A by 2. So if I know the value of mu and I know the value of A, I can get the value of my delta minimum. Okay, so this should also be noted. So this is your equation number 1, this is your equation number 2, and this is your equation number 3. Okay, also note that for small angled prisms, for example, if A is less than 10 degrees, okay, then sine theta is similar to theta. So you can easily substitute for theta for these two, and if you do that, you get A plus delta minimum divided by A, which is nothing but A plus delta minimum, okay, is equal to mu times A. So I can write delta minimum is equal to mu minus 1 into A. So this is extremely important relation. It will come in handy in the questions as well, and it's easier to remember as well. So delta minimum is equal to mu minus 1 into the angle of prism. Similarly, you might see this diagram in the questions. So this is the diagram of delta, which is the angle of deviation on the y-axis, and angle of incidence on the x-axis. Okay, so you see that for some I is equal to the emergent angle, incident is equal to the emergent angle, you have the delta to be equal to minimum. Okay, this should be definitely noted down. Next that we look at is the condition for maximum deviation or grazing emergence. Okay, note that here the ray has bent so much, after it should have come something like this, but it has bent so much that it is just grazing the surface. Okay, what is the condition for this? For this grazing condition, my emergent angle E is nothing but 90 degrees. Okay, so if I just apply Snell's law at the second phase, I can write mu sine R2 is equal to 1. So that implies my mu is equal to 1 by sine R2. Okay, next thing that you should note is sine 1 by mu, sine inverse 1 by mu is equal to theta c. Now this is similar, this is the equation for the total internal refraction as well. Okay, so this should be kept in mind. Now again, if I just use the previous equations, which were R1 plus R2 is equal to A, that implies R1 can be written as A minus theta c. Okay, if I apply the Snell's law at the face AB, then I get 1 into sine theta ig is equal to mu into sine R1. Okay, I have this thing. So if I apply this at the first face AB, I get 1 into sine uh, Ig is equal to mu sine R1. Okay, this gives me my Ig to be equal to sine inverse root of mu square minus 1 into sine A minus cos A. Okay, because sine Ig is equal to mu into sine A cos theta C minus cos A sine theta C. So by Snell's law on the first phase, I get sine of Ig is nothing but mu times sine A cos theta C minus cos A sin theta C. Okay, this should be kept in mind. And as sin theta C is equal to 1 by mu and cos theta C is equal to root mu square minus 1 by mu, thus I can write it like this. Okay, so what you should remember from here is, first of all, this equation and how to derive it if it comes in the paper, and next that if I increases or the incident angle increases beyond Ig, then Ig is the grazing angle of incidence, then R1 increases, thus R2 decreases and becomes less than theta C, and ray starts to emerge from the system. Okay, thus at I greater than or equal to Ig, ray emerges. Okay, otherwise there will be total internal refraction, and here lambda max is what? Ig plus 90 minus A. Okay, these are sometimes just asked in the question that for grazing incidents what will be the angles and what will be different things in those prisms, for example R1 or R2 or E. Those kind of questions we'll do. Next is the no emergence condition. So let the maximum incident angle on the face AB be I max is equal to 90 degrees. Okay, so if I apply the Snell's law on the surface AB, what do I find? I find 1 into sine 90. For example, if I is equal to 90 degree, that implies if I apply the Snell's law on the first surface, I'll get 1 into sine 90 is equal to mu into sine R1. That will give me sine R1 is equal to 1 by mu. Okay, is equal to sine of theta C, where theta C is the critical angle. Here R1 is equal to theta C. Okay, with this in picture, if total internal reflection occurs at the face AC, then you should have that R2 should be greater than theta C for total internal reflection to occur. Okay, and we already know that R1 plus R2 is equal to A. Okay, thus R1 plus R2 is greater than theta C plus theta C, or R1 plus R2 is greater than theta C plus theta C. That implies R1 plus R2 is greater than A. Okay, so from here you can easily get that 1 by sine of A by 2 should be less than mu for the condition of no emergence. Okay, or your refractive index should be greater than 1 by sine A by 2, whichever way you want to remember this. This is a very handy tool. Okay, similarly, first of all, you should note that because mu of violet is greater than mu of R, so that implies delta of violet is greater than delta of red. Why? Because of the equation that we just read right here. Okay, this is similar to this, and we'll talk more about this in the next section. Now let's quickly discuss some other results. First of these is from the dispersion of light. So when light or white light is incident on a prism, then it is split into 7 colors. This phenomena is known as dispersion. A prism introduces a different refractive index with different wavelengths. Okay, so as we already said that lambda min is equal to mu minus 1 into A. if the prism is of a small angle. Okay, then because lambda r is greater than lambda violet, or for the red it's greater than violet, therefore I easily have that mu of violet is greater than mu of r, which we described in the last section as delta of violet is greater than delta of red, or delta minimum of violet is equal to delta minimum of is greater than delta minimum of red. Okay, so what does this mean? If I send in a white light, okay, then the emergent rays will have different components in it. Okay, red, violet, green, blue. Okay, and the amount to which it deviates from its original path will be given by your angle of deviation. So you can see easily that when white light goes in, what really deviates the most? The violet light deviates the most. So the first color that you will see on the bottom is violet, then indigo, then blue, then green, then yellow, then orange, then red. Okay, you'll see colors in this way. Okay, now we come to another important topic, which is angular dispersion. So angular dispersion is the difference of angle of deviations for violet color and red color. Okay, so angular dispersion, it will be denoted by theta, is equal to deviation for violet minus deviation for red, is equal to mu v minus 1 into a from this formula, minus mu r minus 1 into a is equal to mu v minus mu r into a. So you will just take a small note of this formula. Note that it depends on the prism material and on the angle of the prism. Okay, so I have already given you the different colors that will come out of the prism, and these turn out to be very extremely handy when you're trying to do any of the questions. Next is something known as the dispersive power. So I'll just first of all just tell you what theta is: your angular dispersion, okay, and your omega is nothing but your dispersive power. All these will be formula based questions. So it is the ratio of angular dispersion theta to the mean color deviation. Okay, so it is mu v minus mu r divided by mean color deviation, which is mu of y minus 1, because y is somewhere around here, yellow. Okay, and how do you find the refractive index of mean color mu y? So mu y is equal to mu v plus mu r divided by 2, or it is the average of the refractive index for violet and red. Okay. Note that again dispersive power depends only on the material of the prism. Okay, let's go to the next section, which is chromatic aberration. Okay, before doing this I could have told you about two other factors about the combinations of prisms. One is known as the deviation without dispersion, and one is known as dispersion without deviation. Okay, but those are rarely asked in the papers, so we'll see if a question comes in, and at that time I'll try to introduce the topics. So let's look at chromatic aberration quickly. What does this say? It says that first of all, the image of the object in white light found by a lens. So here a white light is coming in instead of a normal monochromatic ray that generally comes in. So if a white light is coming in, then the image of the object found by the lens is usually colored and blurred. Okay, this defect of the image is known as chromatic aberration, and it arises due to the fact that the focal length of a lens, the focal length of this lens, okay, is different for different colors, because you know that the focal length is given by mu minus 1 into 1 by r1 minus 1 by r2. Okay, so it depends on the value of mu, and as mu of lens is maximum for violet while minimum for red, thus violet is focused nearest to the lens while red is farther from the lens. So what will happen is violet will be focused somewhere here while the red will be focused somewhere later. Okay, this is basically a chromatic aberration. Then you can have different forms of it. You can have the longitudinal or axial chromatic aberration. Okay, which generally just says that focal length of r minus focal length of v is equal to omega times focal length of y. Okay, which is the axial or longitudinal chromatic aberration. So let's look at a question. Monochromatic light is incident on a glass prism of angle A. If the refractive index of the material of the prism is mu, a ray incident at an angle theta on the face AB would get transmitted through the face AC of the prism provided which of these? Okay, so first of all, what you should note is they're asking you that the ray should get transmitted from AC. So for a ray to get transmitted from any surface, its angle of incidence should be less than the critical angle. Okay, so if you can recall the prism here, you had an angle of incidence. Let's say this was a normal there. You had an angle of incidence. After refraction, this was your angle, let's say R1. Then you had another angle, let's say R2. And then you had a angle of emergence. Okay, this was the basic rough diagram for the prism. Now, in order to solve any problems, you should apply the Snell's law. So here, applying the Snell's law to the face AB, what do I get? I get 1 into sine theta is equal to mu into sine of r. Okay. Now for it to get transmitted, I should write that r2 should be less than sine inverse of 1 by mu, because theta c is equal to 1 by mu. Okay, now if you can look closely at the prism, you know that you should note that 90 degree plus 90 degree minus r minus r2 is equal to a total of 180 degree. Okay, so I can easily write this down. This can be done if you just make the triangles in this state. Okay, you will get that 90 plus 90 minus r1 minus r2. So what is 90 minus r1? 90 minus r1 is nothing but this angle. 90 minus r2 is nothing but this angle. Okay, so if I add these and I add the angle A as well, sorry, this will have an angle A as well. So A plus 90 minus r1 minus r2 is equal to 180. I can easily write that my r2 is nothing but A minus r1. Okay, or I can write that my A minus r1 is less than sine inverse 1 by mu, given the definition that we gave right over here. This is the condition that we need to apply. Okay, so you can easily see that this is the case for the first equation. So your theta should be greater than sine inverse of mu sine A minus sine inverse 1 minus mu. So this is your answer. Okay, so another question is in front of you. A monochromatic light is incident at a certain angle on an equilateral triangle prism and it suffers a minimum deviation. If the refractive index of the material of the prism is √3, then the angle of incidence is given by which of these? So I will ask you to recall the conditions for minimum deviation. The conditions are I1 is equal to I2, R1 is equal to R2. Okay, that implies R1 is equal to R2 is equal to A by 2 is equal to 30 degrees. Okay, now by Snell's law I can write that mu1 into sine I is equal to mu2 into sine R. Let me just call this to be I, this to be R. Using this I can easily write the 1 into sine I is equal to √3 into 1 by 2 is equal to √3 by 2. That implies I is nothing but 60 degrees. Now let's talk about simple microscope. It is a simple convex lens which is used to see the magnified image of an object. So what do we have here? If I have an unaided eye right over here and an object is placed in front of it, okay, then let it be placed at some distance d, which is the least distance of distinct vision. So for, let's say, for this distance d, my eye is not strained that much in order to see this object. Okay, so let this object has a height O, okay, and it extends an angle alpha at your eye whenever you're trying to see it. Okay, now if I place a lens in between these two, what will happen is uh, my light rays will come, okay, and because it's a convergent lens, then some of them will be converging somewhere around here, okay, and or they might seem to diverge from a point, okay, somewhere here, okay, that I've shown in the second diagram. So in the second diagram, what do we have? I've placed a lens in the path between your eye and your lens. So initially my eye was somewhere here, I could easily see this, and there was an angle that was subtended here, it was equal to alpha. Now what has happened is, because I've placed a lens in between, so the rays that were coming from the object, okay, they converged and they do not really meet after the lens. So what do we get? We see that they seem to be diverging from a point, okay, and this becomes your image. So your image is erect and virtual. And what can I take back from here? I can simply take back that when my object is placed between the focus and the optical center, whenever it's placed between these two, I get a virtual, magnified and erect image. Why is it magnified? Because as you can see, the length of h1 or h prime is greater than that of h. Okay, so what has actually happened in the process? You were first trying to see the object without any lens, okay, and after the lens, you are basically trying to see the image which the lens produces. So the lens produces an image somewhere around here, and your eye is trying to see that image. Okay, so first I define something known as the maximum or the magnifying power MP, which is nothing but the visual angle subtended by instrument, which is beta. Okay, this is the angle at which your eye is seeing the final image, and divided by the maximum visual angle for unaided eye. So the maximum visual angle for unaided eye is given by alpha right over here. Okay, this is the maximum visual angle. So if I just substitute the values, what do I have for visual angle with instrument beta? It is nothing but your uh, h by minus u, h divided by minus u. Okay, and what is your maximum visual angle for unaided eye? It is nothing but h by minus d. Why is it so? Because tan theta is similar to theta if theta is small. So I can get the values for alpha and beta. Okay, so it's basically beta by alpha or tan beta by tan alpha, which gives me the value as d by u. Okay, now there are two conditions here. There are two cases that are extremely important. First of all, I want you to mark this down. The first case is when image is formed at infinity. Okay, when v is equal to minus infinity, then what do we have? So by the lens equation, I have 1 by v minus 1 by u is equal to 1 by f. Okay, and if I take 1 by v is equal to 1 by minus infinity, then that gives me u is equal to f. So my magnifying power MP is nothing but d by f. Okay, next case that I see is if the image is at a minimum distance of clear vision, which was d. So if the image, if v is equal to minus d, no, d is extremely important. If I just apply the above equation again, what do I see? I see that d by u is equal to 1 plus d by f, or I can write my magnifying power is nothing but 1 plus d by f. 1 plus d by f. This is also the second important thing that you should remember from the perspective of a simple microscope. Okay. Next we move on to the compound microscope, which is a slightly more complicated picture to dwell with or deal with. So I have the compound microscope right over here. What do we have here? Here there are two lenses in total. It's a compound microscope is again used to get more magnified images. Now the object is placed in front of the objective lens and image is seen through the eyepiece. So you have the objective lens or lens which is closer to the object is known as the objective lens. So, and what will you be seeing? You will be seeing the final image that is formed after refractions by two of the lenses. Okay, that is what your eye is going to look at. Now the aperture of the objective lens is less as compared to the eyepiece because object is very near to the collection center or the object. So collection of more light is not required. Generally, object is placed between f and 2f. Due to this, a real and inverted and magnified image is formed between 2f and infinity or minus infinity. It is known as intermediate image A prime B prime. The intermediate image acts as an object for eyepiece. So I use the first objective lens and I try to form the image. Due to this, the image will be formed somewhere around here, which will be real and inverted. Now this will act as the object for the eye lens, okay, or the eyepiece, and then due to this an image will be formed which will be virtual, and I can easily see this image at B double prime. Let the height of the final image be h2. Let the height of the initial object be h, and let the height of the intermediate image be h1. Okay. You can see that the intermediate image is acting as the object for the eyepiece. Now the distance between both the lenses are adjusted in such a way that intermediate image falls between the optical center of eyepiece and its focus. Okay. So for the eyepiece, I want the distance a prime or C a prime to be such that it falls between the focus of the eyepiece and the pole of the eyepiece. Why is it so? Because if it's between the focus and the pole, then you'll get divergent rays after this, and it seems as if the image is coming from a point B prime. Okay. In this condition, the final image will be virtual, erect, and magnified, which is what we want for our eye to see. Okay. So my total magnification power is equal to my linear magnification into my angular magnification. So my magnification power is equal to linear mag into my angular mag, okay, which is nothing but, let's say, m naught into me is equal to v naught by u naught into d by u of e, where o represents the objective and e represents the eyepiece. Now there are two conditions here as well. So first I want you to take a note of this. Here are two conditions here as well. When the final image is formed at the minimum distance of distinct vision, which is at d, then in that case my mp is equal to v naught by u naught into 1 plus d by fe. Okay. Here the length of the tube is v naught plus ue. So length of tube is equal to v naught plus ue or mod ue. I just want you to remember that all these are important things that you should remember. I can even write this as f naught divided by f naught plus u naught, okay, and into 1 plus d by fe. I can even write this as f naught minus v naught by f naught into 1 plus d by Fe, or H2 by H1 into 1 plus d by Fe. Okay, so the first case is what you should definitely remember, and most of the problems will be from either this or the second case, which is when the final image is formed at infinity. In that case, if I just take my v of e to be equal to infinity, then that implies that my u e turns out to be equal to Fe. This is for image at d. This is image at infinity. Okay, so in this case u is equal to Fe, so I can write my power is nothing but v naught by u naught, v naught by u naught into d by Fe. Okay, it should be clear from here, and you should see that the length of the tube again is v naught plus mod of ue. So sign convention for solving the numericals is, I'll give you the sign convention for solving these things. Sign convention is my u naught is negative, u naught is equal to negative, my v naught is equal to positive, my f naught is equal to positive. Okay, my ue is equal to negative, my ve is equal to negative, and my fe is equal to positive. Here again I can write that my m naught is equal to negative and my me is equal to positive. At the end m turns out to be negative. Okay, so here you can easily see what clearly happens quickly. You start with the object, you send in rays, you get an image somewhere around here after the focal point, so you don't want the image to be inside the region between C and f naught, or the focal length of the objective lens. You get an image somewhere around here which is real and inverted, and this acts as the object for the eye lens, and then because it's between the focus and the pole, that is why you will get the image at this point, and the eye will perceive this as the object, okay, which will be magnified because it has a larger height. Next we talk about the astronomical telescope. So a telescope is used to see distant objects. What do we have here? You have rays coming in from infinity which are almost parallel. Then because they are coming very close or parallel to the axis, principal axis, what you see is they converge at the focal plane. So the convergence is at a point b prime. This will be the first image from the objective lens. Okay, so this image is, as you can see, it's real and it's inverted. Then what do we have? It's making itself at the focus. Now this image a prime b prime, which I have given here, this image a prime b prime will act as the object for the eyepiece. Okay, and it will form a final image at a double prime b double prime. Okay, so now here you can note that the aperture of the first lens is greater than that of the second one, or the aperture of the objective is greater than that of the eyepiece. That is because the aperture has to take in rays from a large distance, so a lot of rays should actually enter it. Here again I have the simple formula, which is my MP is equal to visual angle with instrument beta divided by visual angle for unaided eye. So visual angle with instrument by a visual angle with unaided eye. Okay, this is beta, this is alpha. I'll just erase this and zoom this in so that you can easily see what betas and alphas are. Okay, so my alpha is the small angle which the incoming rays were making with the principal axis. Okay, and then what was my beta? My beta is what I get for looking through the objective lens at the image that is formed. So for looking here, the angle that this makes with the principal axis is my beta. Okay, I can again write this down for two different cases. If the final image is at infinity, so VE is equal to minus infinity, and UE is equal to negative. I can use the lens formula which gives me UE is equal to FE, or I can easily write this down as MP is equal to minus F naught by FE. Focal length of objective by focal length of eyepiece. This is extremely important. We'll look at questions. Again, the length of the tube is equal to F naught plus FE. The second case is when the image is formed at D, which is the least distance of distinct vision. So here the VE is equal to minus D. Okay, UE is equal to negative. So I can use the lens formula again, which gives me minus 1 by D minus 1 by UE plus 1 by UE, because negative cancels the negative, is equal to 1 by F. That will give me my MP is nothing but minus F naught by UE, okay, which is nothing but minus of F naught by FE into 1 plus F naught by D. So you should definitely remember at least these two things, because telescopes are prominent in the paper every time. So if you already remember the formula for magnification, it will be very handy. But even if you don't, if you know the basics of the diagram, okay, if we want to make it in the exam, you just have to make two lenses like this, make the object, okay, make some point over here as the first image, and then keep it at the focus of the objective, then use it as the image for the second one, and you will find that the final image is formed somewhere here or before the lens itself. The final image will be formed somewhere here, okay, and those are the only things that you need to worry about. Now let's look at a question to clarify some of our doubts. An astronomical telescope has an angular magnification of magnitude 5 for distant objects. The separation between the objective and the eyepiece is 36 cm and the final image is formed at infinity. The focal length f0 of the objective and the focal length fe is of the eyepiece, and you need to find them out. Now, first of all, what is the angular magnification? The angular magnification m is nothing but f0 by fe, okay, because the image is formed at infinity. Okay, so first of all, you should remember this for your paper. Next, the separation between them is given by L is equal to f0 plus fe, where L is the total length of the telescope. Now f0 by fe is given to be 5, so I can write that f0 is equal to 5 times fe. Okay, with this in hand, we have f0 plus fe is given to be 36 centimeter. So I can write 5 fe plus fe is equal to 36, or fe turns out to be 6 centimeter. Now that we have fe, I can write f naught. So f naught is 5 times fe, which is nothing but 30 centimeter. So we have both the values. So what you have to remember from here is what does angular magnification mean in terms of telescope. Okay, and this is the value for when the image is at infinity. Similarly, you will have values for different points, and in most of the questions you'll be requiring this.